Here are 3 common mistakes in Python all devs should avoid. Mistake 1. Using mutable objects as default arguments, especially lists or dictionaries. Imagine we write a function called add1 that adds 1 to a list called numbers and then prints this out, and by default we set numbers to be an empty list. When we call this function and pass in a list containing 3, 4 as an argument, it works as expected and prints 3, 4, 1, and if we call it again, it still prints 3, 4, 1. If we call this function without any arguments explicitly specified, we might expect the function to create an empty numbers list since that's the default, append an integer 1, and then print just the 1 each time it's called. However, this isn't what happens. The first time we call it, we print a single 1, but then the second time we see 1 printed twice. So what's going on here? Well, in Python, default arguments are only instantiated when the function is defined, not each time the function is called. This means that numbers always references the same default list instance, regardless of how many times we call add1, and so we're modifying the same list every time we call the function. One way to avoid this mistake is to use the none keyword as a default for numbers instead, and then instantiate the list inside function if numbers is none. This way, we'll create a new list each time the function is called, and thus get the expected behavior. Mistake 2. Not using copy when necessary. Suppose we write a function called double which takes in a list of numbers, creates a new list called new numbers, doubles these values, and then returns this new list. If we run this code and pass in nums as input, we'll see that output does indeed contain the doubled values, but we'll also see that values from the original nums list were doubled as well. How is this happening if we never changed nums explicitly? The reason this occurs is because the assignment operator creates a reference to the original list and not a copy. This means that when we set new numbers equal to numbers, new numbers is pointing to the same list in memory as numbers is. So when we double the values in new numbers, we're actually updating the list numbers is also pointing to. To avoid this mistake, we need to explicitly create a copy of the input list when assigning new numbers via copy.copy. This way, we avoid accidentally updating the original input. Mistake 3. Removing items while iterating over a list. Imagine we write a program that iterates over a sequence of numbers, and if a number is even, removes it from the list using the del keyword. This program seems like it'll work at first glance, but unfortunately that's not the case. Instead, we run into an index error. How does this happen? Well, simply put, this is due to a mismatch between the index iteration sequence and changing list length. When we create the range iterator, the code will try to access indices 0, 1, 2, and 3 in that order. But after removing the second element, the list length changes and there's no longer any element at the third index. That's why we'll get an error when we try to access this index. One simple way to solve this would be to iterate through the indices in the reverse order so that the indices don't shift as we remove elements. In Python, we can do this by using the reversed function, which generates a sequence of elements in the reverse order. With this, our program works as expected. Thank you for watching, share a like if you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.